Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer Monday morning briefing with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin after, well, let's be honest, a pretty disappointing weekend for Hibs in the Premier Sports Cup as they bowed out against Rangers, going down 2-0 at Ibrox on Saturday evening. A bit of an anti-climax of a game of football for me. Not too much to enjoy about it from a Hibs perspective. I must say we're going to pick through the bones of that today and also look ahead to Tuesday night's game away at Falkirk, because the games, they just keep on coming. That one takes on I'd say quite a fair bit of significance for Hibs, trying to get back on track. A couple of games without a win. Really trying to kickstart the league season with the cup out of the way, European football out of the way as well. So we'll start with Sunday's game, but first of all, just a word for our sponsor before I forget about it, to be honest with you. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs, so start your search today. Patrick, good morning. How are you getting on?
Good morning, Liam. I am not bad. Ready to pick through Saturday's games. Games, plural. Game, singular. I think a lot to take from it. A lot of talking points, certainly, for Hibs going forward. And as you say, Tuesday night's game away to Falkirk takes on a fairly significant kind of role in the season now, whereas I think previously it might just been another game. I think it takes on a lot more importance now for reasons that I believe we will address in the next 20 minutes or so.
Yeah. So what's your overall feeling about Saturday, having had a day to reflect on it?
I think there were a lot of kind of subplots to it. I think when all this talk about the protests against the Rangers management, the Rangers board, the Rangers hierarchy, the fact that it felt like there was almost like an expectation that Hibs would go there and win because Rangers were in this perceived state of disarray. Especially when you look at Hearts going there the previous week and winning fairly comfortably, and the fact that I think by the players' own admissions, Rangers haven't been particularly convincing. In any of the games so far this season. You could call it teething problems under sort of new manager with new players bedding in, that sort of thing. But I think it's always dangerous to go into games with a kind of mindset of complacency. I don't think players say they would never do that. I think it would have been a bit difficult to be a Hibs player and not be aware of kind of all the noise surrounding the game, which was very much will Rangers cope? How will they deal with a Hibs team that beat them at Ibrox last time around fairly convincingly? And I think it's just almost, when you look at the high standards that Hibs have these days and how they played in Europe and how they performed away to some really tough teams in difficult venues, Partizan Belgrade, Legia Warsaw, and how they were last season against, the likes of Celtic and Rangers and Hearts, beating Rangers at Ibrox, as we said, beating Celtic at home, beating Hearts home and away. I think there's almost like there are expectation levels, but not as a sort of, Hibs should be going and winning that game no matter what, but just more like Hibs should be going to that game and they should be competing. Which is like kind of the bare minimum. There was a period of time where I think, especially with Ibrox and Celtic Park, Hibs were going away to those venues and just didn't really look like they believed they could win. It was under sort of various managers. It was kind of, turn up and hope it's not hiding almost. Certainly under the likes of Alan Stubbs back in, maybe the Championship, Hibs did look like going into any game, they thought, well, we can beat anyone. And, that sort of continued under Neil Lennon as well. And then that kind of, I think it died away a wee bit. And then David Gray brought that back last season. And you had this kind of mentality amongst the Hibs squad where, particularly in that unbeaten run, where it was, we could beat anyone on our day. There's no reason to be afraid of any team. And, quite often in big games, they did turn up. Very unlucky with the sort of, the two cup draws, put them away to Celtic at Celtic Park. But aside from that, to be bottom of the table and to come back and finish third and qualify for Europe was great. Has, of course, meant a lot more expectation from the fans. Particularly with how they did in Europe as well. And I just think Saturday fell a bit flat. I just thought, a few too many players having an off day, perhaps. But I'm sort of reluctant to just sort of put it off as a bad day at the office because we've talked about this before. There have been there have been sort of warning signs in other games. We've seen Hibs struggle at home to get 3 points. They've been decent away from home, but I think a performance like this probably was coming, where it just didn't click, and obviously there were changes to the starting lineup as well. And I just wonder whether this game might serve as a kind of reset for Hibs in the this sort of like kind of muddling along with kind of scraping draws at home, and whatever you want to call it. I think that probably ends now. I think HTC will be a very interesting place this morning. It might be a very interesting place yesterday if the players were called in. Just in terms of saying, that's not what we sort of expect from this Hibs team. That's way below the standards we're setting. We have to change that starting on Tuesday night.
Yeah, absolutely. I think afterwards, David Gray, it was as if he didn't want to be too critical. He was obviously saying the defending wasn't good enough for the goals. But he was kind of talking, he was saying things like they were sort of comfortable enough in the game and stuff like that, and kind of, emphasising the fact that, it was never going to be a case of Hibs turning up and just turning Rangers over, no matter what their troubles have been. But I just to kind of follow on from what you said there, I suspect privately he'll probably be really disappointed with that, because they never really laid a glove on Rangers, apart from obviously Boyle gets unlucky with the disallowed goal. It's the right decision to rule it out, but it is unfortunate just the way the ball drops onto his arm. Another chance, a couple other chances, but I mean, apart from that, it didn't really feel as though Hibs did enough to really. I think that the big thing was to try and get the crowd to turn on Rangers, because you've seen that it doesn't take very much for the atmosphere. Because of how volatile the situation is at the moment, it wouldn't really take much for the crowd at Ibrox to get on Rangers' backs. I mean, even on a side note, even when they were 2-0 up, people were still getting on. They were still that's how kind of fragile it is there at the moment. I just don't think Hibs were able to harness the potential of that, really, because you have seen that in certain situations the Rangers team, they don't cope particularly well with it. And I thought it was set up for Hibs to go and do something, because we've seen that the performances away in Europe were largely pretty good. There was a maturity about them. There was a discipline. There was, certainly out in Belgrade, they were clinical and taking their chances, scored away in Midtjylland as well, scored goals away against Legia Warsaw. And I was kind of thinking, right, well, it's time to take that into a domestic game. It's it's not, it's a cup game, get a similar feel in that sense to the European games, but it never really got going at any point, which I just thought was strange, because I think when I seen the lineup, Josh Mulligan out to right wing back.
Who suggested that, by the way?
Did you pick the team? A memo into
can't confirm nor deny.
Into the manager's office on Friday morning. Chaiwa coming into the middle of the park. Obviously expected McGrath would play. It seemed like a team that was set up to go and be quite aggressive, I thought. Obviously Chaiwa's got bundles of energy. He's a good presser. Mulligan out on the wing again. Lots of energy there, lots of legs to go and get after Rangers. But I mean, it felt as if Hibs for I think at least significant chunks of the game, we're kind of happy to just kind of get back in a block and sort of invite Rangers onto them and say, okay, you just go and break us down. And I think I was expecting a wee bit more aggression. I think maybe is it just a personal preference on my part, because I think this Hibs team are at their best when they're on the front foot, when they're being aggressive, especially when they had a sort of chance, I thought, to go after a side that are looking pretty vulnerable, to put them under a bit of pressure. Instead, the way I felt it sort of panned out is Rangers were kind of allowed to sort of build their confidence in the game. I felt a wee bit. I think they kind of got better as it went along, when they weren't under too much duress, if you like. I think when Hibs did maybe try and go after them a wee bit, I just didn't feel it was quite right. I felt like the kind of gaps were too big between players. weren't able to kind of press effectively enough out wide, which I thought again was surprising given the players that were selected. And I think that the danger is when you do maybe elect to sit a bit deeper and invite teams, and we've seen Hibs do that. They can do it. We've talked about how often how well they can adapt to different setups and different situations. But I think that the danger is if you concede a goal like that first one, where it's just somebody just switches off at a set piece, and before you know it, you get that shoot in behind, and then the second one, this losing 2 goals in the lead up to half time. We spoke to Grant Hanley after the game, and he used the exact kind of right phrase. It says it just kind of knocked the wind out of us a bit, or something to that effect. And it does. I mean, to be kind of a few minutes away from half time, maybe still level, then to go in 2-0 down, it's sort of psychological. From that is difficult to recover from. And I think when you maybe have been sort of sitting off the game a wee bit, it can be difficult to then just flick a switch and then go and be more aggressive and go after the game. In the second half from Hibs, it was they didn't do enough really to test Jack Butland, if at all, or to really put Rangers to kind of like maybe sow a wee seed of doubt in Rangers. So I mean, it was a kind of disappointing day all round. I think David Grady tried to be, he was diplomatic about it, and he made some good points. I think Rangers are still an expensively assembled team, a lot of quality in there, even if it's not been clicking for them. But I think, as I said at the beginning, privately, I suspect he'll be really pretty disappointed about that. And he referenced, I was going to come on to next, he did reference the sort of timing of goals that Hibs are conceding at the moment. And you tweeted about it on Saturday. I think it was. Is it now sort of 6 goals they've conceded this season in and around half time, which is it's a pretty concerning trend, that, because obviously there's no good time to concede a goal, but I think there are worse times than others, and Hibs are making a bad habit of conceding at bad times.
They are, and I mean it's bad enough looking at goals, because what I did was just took goals that have been conceded in the kind of lead up to half time and kind of first half injury time, so kind of from like 40 minutes onwards to 45 plus 3, 45 plus 4, etc. 6 goals in all your competitive games so far is concerning, I think. When you factor in goals that have been conceded just after half time, then the number gets larger. Just thinking about Dundee United scoring after the half time break, Kilmarnock did the same, and that to me sort of suggests is there a bit of a it's almost like you get to that 5 minutes before half time and you kind of think, we're just about there. Get in the dressing room, have a wee break, regroup, go again, that sort of thing. And it's maybe straight. I don't know, maybe it's not as straightforward as this, but it seems, you kind of have half a mind on it and think we're just about there. And the problem is that if 1 or 2 players do that, then, the whole thing can come tumbling down. And I think, it was something like three goals conceded sort of late on in games, all of which were in Europe. So you can almost sort of say, well, that's, that could be fatigue. It's still concerning, conceding late goals against Legia in Poland, against Partizan at home, and then Midtjylland as well, right at the end of extra time. So you can almost kind of explain those ones away, with fatigue, I guess. But right before half time, it just seems to be, that to me just seems to be a concentration thing, or I don't know, I don't want to call it complacency. But, there is almost maybe that, you almost like putting the brakes on because, you're getting towards half time. Whereas, teams who keep going towards half time and just go kind of like hell for leather for the final 5 minutes, you're probably going to get something. If those two mentalities are kind of meeting in the middle, where one team is, kind of putting the brakes on and the other one is, putting the foot on the accelerator. And, like you say, David Gray did mention this. What's also, I think, concerning is he talked about the manner the goals lost against Dundee United. And then a week later, we see them doing, broadly the same thing. Very straightforward goals to lose. One obviously is a set piece. Hibs lost a lot of goals from set pieces last season. They were good from set pieces, but I think it was also pointed out that it would have been one of the games at Easter Road, but I think Raskin scored a near identical goal against Hibs, the same sort of corner routine. And for the first goal, Chaiwa loses his man, just doesn't keep up with him, doesn't track him, which is pretty unforgivable. And then I think the second goal is, McGrath doesn't really track the runner that well. There is a fortuitous deflection off Bashiri, and it kind of sets up nicely for Miovski just to kind of tap in. But they're avoidable goals, and I think that must be particularly for a head coach who was a defender in his playing days, it must be so frustrating for Gray. And I know he he never comes out and kind of fillets the players. Mm-hmm. But I can imagine, like I said earlier, I just kind of wonder whether this might be a little bit of a kind of turning point, because he's kind of saying the same things in press conferences. He's talking about the timings of goals, he's talking about the manner of goals lost, he's talking about creating a lot of chances, which okay, you are creating quite a few chances, but it almost feels like they're kind of slipping back into bad habits, and that must be concerning. I think even that moment, I can't quite remember who played the ball through, but the ball ends up with Bowie, and you think, just shoot. And instead he kind of runs on a little bit, he then sort of takes it back, he plays in Boyle, and then his shot's sort of just over. Second half, I think there was a cross from Nicky Cadden, maybe Junior Hoylett, to Clige, and he sort of takes a touch, and then you think, okay, you're going to shoot. And then, it's just that sort of there's no shot, and then you kind of pass it to somebody else, and the shot's blocked, and it's that sort of somebody pointed out on social media over the weekend that a lot of the teams that Hibs are playing are kind of getting, one or two chances and are taking them. And Hibs are kind of getting a lot of chances and they're not taking enough of them, and that's the problem. And Jamie McGrath said this after the Dundee United game. He said, we can't be scoring 3 or 4 goals to win every game. We need to be better at the back, need to take our chances, that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, we didn't really see that. Didn't really see that on Saturday, and also a little bit concerning because you get Gray talking in the lead up to it and saying, these are the types of games you want to play in as a player. If you can't get up for this, then what are you doing with yourself? Mm-hmm. He said all the right things, trying to ignore the noise, block out everything about, Russell Martin, Ibrox, Rangers, protests, players, you name it. So, he's saying all the right things, but it just, for whatever reason, it just, nothing really seemed to click. And it felt like quite a flat performance. It felt quite passive. And you look at the way Hearts played when they went to Rangers, I kind of assumed Hibs would do the same thing or something very similar, given, we know how good they are at pressing. You pointed this out earlier. And just, to touch on Mulligan at right wing back, obviously I did that piece last week and I said, is it time for him to get a shot out there, to get a run of games? And I did kind of caveat it by saying maybe away to Ibrox isn't the best place to kind of start it. And I also felt that, the midfield needs to be right before you can do that, because at the moment, I think you need Mulligan in that midfield to try and avoid losing the midfield battle. And I think we saw quite clearly on Saturday that when you don't have Mulligan in there, the midfield really lacks something. Mm-hmm. It lacks a Nectar Triantis type. That's that is the elephant in the room that's kind of looming over us. It's, everything that he did. It's very easy to say that, if they had Triantis in there, things would be different. It's a very simplistic way of looking at it. But I think it's one of those where I think we maybe said at the time, it might not be completely obvious what Triantis brings to this team until he's no longer in it. And I just think, that coupled with this sort of wee sort of formation change, this kind of 3-4-2-1, that sort of thing, it's just something isn't quite working. And it's taken a few games too many for that to become kind of abundant to Hibs, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not abundant, obvious. It's, we kind of saw this different setup in Europe. We've seen this different setup at home. And last season, one of the big sort of reasons that things like the Fortunes did turn around is because they changed that formation. They went to the kind of 3-5-2, and, with an attacking midfielder sitting just behind the front two, but also able to drop back and kind of bolster the midfield. And I don't know why he's changed it. I don't know if it's the players he's got available. I don't know if it's something to do with, where he sees the players' strengths that he has. I don't know whether it's, if he had different players, it might be a different approach. I think they went to a back four later on in the game on Saturday. And it's just that, Gray's always said that he's flexible when it comes to formations and tactics. It's very, he's not sort of going to be wedded to one formation. Obviously, I think he has the players at the moment to play that kind of 3-5-2. For whatever reason, he's not quite doing it the same way he did last season. But I think that maybe the concerning thing is that when you look at particularly the second leg against Legia Warsaw, Hibs had a really poor first half. Just really, Legia scored quite early on, and you just sort of thought, this is it. Legia, they'll score another one like early in the second half. That'll be the game over as a contest, and just be a rather kind of stuttering end to their European campaign. And instead, what happened was they kind of came roaring out the traps, scored 3 goals in quick succession. And if it hadn't been for losing a late goal, might very well have got through to the group stages. And I think the issue with that is that, that second half, Hibs just kind of looked very much like a team kind of going for it based on desire, belief. It wasn't sort of particularly tactically kind of sound. It was kind of just, every time Hibs got the ball, it was just attack. And I think, I don't know. I don't know whether it comes down to a belief. I don't know whether it comes down to like trying to stick to these tactics or what it is. But I just feel there's something that's not quite working there at the moment. Obviously you look at Boyle and Bowie, 2 very good players. We know how good the defence is, and you can bring in Grant Hanley. You've got Warren O'Hora on the bench. There's a lot of players in there. Who either performed very well last season or who have performed well this season. I thought Hanley was probably, the standout on Saturday for me. But then the midfield, that sort of seems to be the main issue at the moment. Is just sort of getting that midfield blend right. And I kind of feel that maybe Dan Barlaser is the person to kind of fix that. Maybe not. Maybe it just needs a wee tactical tweak. It'll be interesting to see what they do against Falkirk tomorrow night. But at the moment, it just sort of feels like something isn't quite clicking. And I don't know whether players need, a bit of a rest like we saw last season. They need a break, taking out the team, whatever. But it was, for me, it was a concerning performance. Like the result, of course, is disappointing, but the performance was concerning because it didn't really look like the Hibs team that we've come to know over the last few months. And you can point to the international break, you can point to the European games, that sort of thing. But I think the conclusion is that you really would have expected a lot more from Hibs, regardless of what situation Rangers were in. Because as David Gray says, you can only control what you can control. You can only focus on yourselves. But for a team that sort of prides itself on having belief when they go into games like this, they didn't seem to have an awful lot of belief for most of the game, and that was the surprising part for me and the concerning part. And I think that's what. That's kind of part of the reason why I think there's quite a few questions for David Gray to answer between now and or not answer. That sounds a bit ominous, but just things that he has to deal with between now and kick off tomorrow night. If Hibs are to kind of bounce back from exiting the cup, and I suppose just kind of like get their league season kick started.
Yeah, aye. I mean, I think people always talk about sort of ways to lose games, and I think if the perception is always that wee bit different if you go to Ibrox or Celtic Park, and the perception is that you've made a real good fist of it. You've at least tried to make Rangers work for it or Celtic work for it. But I think the disappointment then comes from this feeling that Hibs didn't really do that, and then as you say, it just adds a kind of an extra pressure on a Tuesday night now, because if I've got to go away to Falkirk, and it's not. Newly promoted team, but it's not going to be an easy game by any means. I've gone up there, plastic pitch, Tuesday night under the lights, potentially not a particularly hospitable environment at the Falkirk Stadium. Weather-wise, it very rarely is. It's going to be one of those ones where I think Hibs that you're going to need to dig in. You're going to need to show a bit of grit and fight, and it's just that kind of the quirks of Scottish football that the immediate switch from going to Ibrox and the way you have to set up against a side like Rangers or Celtic, where the gap in resources is so vast, and then it just completely switches to now. The expectation changes. The onus is probably on Hibs to go and take this game by the scruff of the neck. And so I make no mistake about it, like fans are going to be expecting a result and performance from this game. There's no two ways about that. I think Hibs, they really do. I think they need to go and win this game to get the just to give the season a wee bit of a jolt, because it kind of
one jolt back.
Yeah, it feels as though it's just kind of plodding along a wee bit at the moment. There's not the kind of obviously the buzz and the excitement of the European games wears off. You're back to your bread and butter, if you like. Sorry to use that cliche, but the season now needs something to spark it into life again, because it feels, as I said, that it can be in danger of just drifting a wee bit. Obviously, the league is so tight and stuff like that the positions in the league can be a wee bit false at this stage. But even taking that aside, ignoring that, just in terms of a bit of momentum, a bit of, I suppose the key point is Hibs don't want to lose this feel-good factor that has been so painstakingly, the feel-good factor that the players and the staff and the fans, that everybody's kind of worked so hard to cultivate, to bring together. And the nature of football is, unfortunately, is that sometimes stuff like that can dissipate quicker than you would like it to, or perhaps quicker than it really should do in the circumstances. But that is just the sort of nature of the game, and
I feel like we're kind of already seeing that a little bit.
Yeah, it is kind of fading away a wee bit. I mean, I'm not like, you're not hitting the panic button at this stage, but I think supporters, they do need something to be able to latch on to, and I think at the moment they're maybe not quite seeing that. They're just not quite seeing the team that they saw for so long last season, and obviously people are going to be a wee bit disappointed with that to an extent. And so it's just that this game now takes on, as you say, quite a lot of significance in just trying to find that spark again, I suppose.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it. Can they do it on a cold Tuesday night in Falkirk type thing? Just if we're going down the cliche route. But I think it's quite a funny one, because you look at the league table at the moment. Hibs sitting in third, and if they win tomorrow night, then they do kind of like pull away a little bit from the rest of the pack, something like that, which is quite a sort of bizarre situation to be in. Like Hibs have. I've said this before in articles on the website, that you can spin it sort of certain ways. So you can say Hibs are unbeaten in the league so far. Like, great. Yeah. Hibs are, unbeaten at home in competitive games, or league games, since November last year, that kind of thing. But also like pretty good. But then you also look at it and say, Hibs haven't won at home yet this season. They've drawn the last 3 games, they're leaking more goals, that sort of thing. So you can kind of spin it like one or two ways, and you can say, well, this is proof that they don't need to panic. But then you also look at the other teams and you say, well, you can't really legislate for Aberdeen having the start to the season that they've had. Couldn't legislate for Rangers having the start to the season they've had. I know some people would probably disagree, but it's one of those where I feel like it almost feels like a very Hibs thing to do, where you're presented with like a really great opportunity to do something, and you just kind of, it's like you step on the rake and you kind of don't manage to do it. Like, there is, I think at the moment there's a good opportunity for Hibs to go into tomorrow night's game, get a really convincing result. I'm talking a kind of like a 3-0, not to take anything away from Falkirk, been very impressed by them so far this season. Thought they were very good last season. John McGlynn has, he's got a very good team there. There's like a really good mix of kind of youth and experience, and players who've probably haunted Hibs in the past, and that kind of spectre hangs over tomorrow night's game. But let's not think about that. But I think,
no,
again,
it's you've said it.
Yeah, well, I'm not the first. I won't be the last. I think it does need to be a convincing victory. Hibs need to focus on that. Like, obviously take nothing away from Falkirk, and I know David Gray will talk about respecting them and everything, as as you should with any team. But it feels like Hibs almost need to abandon this this kind of approach of we'll do it this way, we'll do it that way. Just go for it, because like you were saying about that feel good factor, like it is starting to kind of dissolve a little bit. And I know social media is not the best barometer of kind of fan opinion, but there were some good points made on Saturday night. There were some outlandish points made on Saturday night, and there were some actionable things said on Saturday night as well. So you're obviously getting that kind of full spectrum of opinion and beliefs and stuff like that. But it's getting to that stage where if Hibs can't turn it around, if they can't sort of if they don't get a result tomorrow night, I think it does get a little bit ugly. I think David Gray does have a lot of credit in the bank for last season, for the way that he kind of made Hibs hard to beat. They went into Europe, kind of went toe to toe with, three kind of good teams that I think previously you might have looked at that and thought, Hibs haven't got a hope in hell. And, they actually came very, very close. And that sort of like making them hard to beat has kind of withered away a little bit. They've still kind of got this. I mean, I've written about this already and sort of said they still have this like they don't know when they're beaten feeling. But I think, Saturday almost kind of rubbished that a little bit. I'm not saying they went into it looking beaten, but it's like, losing the 2 goals for half time, they did just sort of seem to kind of crumble from then on. And the second half it's almost like a formality. I think there were maybe only 2-3 real opportunities that you might have thought, oh, something could happen here. And 2 of them are the ones I talked about where, one of them was the one I talked about. Cliche got that chance. You think just shoot. And instead, there's that little bit, I'll take an extra touch, I'll try and pass it. And, I don't know whether that's I don't know whether the players, it's a kind of confidence thing. And it's just like, we're desperate for a goal here, but I don't back myself to do it. Cliche's maybe not been getting the run of games that he needs. I think we saw against Livingston the Premier Sports Cup round before the quarterfinals, the sort of last 16 or round of whatever they call it. He got that start there. He looked good. That kind of, he's good in the air. He's got that kind of bustling quality, and took his goal well. And I think, if you've got a player like that who's maybe only coming on in dribs and drabs, then maybe the confidence isn't where it should be, and that's a bit of an issue. Because what I think you saw last season was you had players who, Dwight Gale's a good example. You kind of knew he was going to come off the bench for like 20, 25 minutes. But you'd always kind of back him to do something, whether it was to get a goal, whether it was to like play somebody else in. And he kind of accepted that was his role. And I do feel Hibs kind of haven't replaced him properly. I don't think they've really replaced. Well, they haven't replaced Kurevic either. We know that. We know they looked at Lyndon Dykes, who scored a late winner for Birmingham at the weekend, just to kind of rub salt in the wounds to not getting the loan deal done on deadline day. And they've not really replaced Triantis, and that's an issue as well. And I think it's difficult because if this kind of continues, if Hibs start kind of dropping down the table a wee bit, then I think we will start to see things turning a wee bit in terms of like the fan opinion. And obviously, like David Gray got time last season, and they said it needs time to build, to kind of put his ideas across, and there was this this kind of belief that the players would kind of listen to what he was saying and it would turn, and then eventually it did. But I don't know whether he has that much time this season. Like, I'm not for a moment saying he's under pressure. I'm not saying any of that should be shouldn't be questions about his job status at the moment. I'm just saying, like, if it carries on that Hibs are just kind of meandering forward, then that's maybe the longer that goes on for, the greater a concern it becomes. Another way you can look at it is, he's just in his second full season as a head coach in his own right. And what happened last season, like the expectations are higher, the standards are higher. And we've seen before how teams who finish third one season struggle the next. But you would just kind of think, with the way that Hibs were active in the transfer market during the summer, and the way that the kind of mentality is at the club, that you would have thought Hibs would be wanting to buck that trend. They'd be wanting to kind of avoid that happening to them. I think it is still early days. I think because of the European games as well, and because of the extra time in certain games, it does sort of feel like a lot of games have been played so far. And then you look at it, you think, oh well, that's it. It's only 4 in the league. Like tomorrow's going to be the 5th, and so it's like this big thing. Like it isn't time to panic just yet. It's not. There's cause for concern, yes, but I think we're early enough in the season that it can be sorted. But absolutely. I think the concern really for fans must be like, is it going to be sorted before it becomes more of a problem? I think if you look at last season, arguably like Joseph Bursic could have been dropped for Jordan Smith earlier than he was, in terms of just like making individual mistakes, that kind of thing. But again, it depends on, is Jordan Smith ready to come in? That might have been a factor. There's a lot. I think there's a lot going on. Why certain players maybe aren't starting, obviously still trying to get up to fitness. Grant Hanley not having a pre-season. Zach Mitchell as well. I mean, he's not been in a matchday squad yet because he's still getting his fitness up. So I think he was injured in pre-season. You've got Dan Barlas, who's not, played any competitive football this season before coming to Hibs. So there's little things like that, and there is a certain degree of being patient and sort of waiting to see, what it's like when everyone's kind of fit and ready and good to go. But there's also not an awful lot of time for that patience. So, I think it just kind of boils down to tomorrow night being, just like really, really important. It would have been important anyway. I think it's even more important after Saturday's result and performance. Like the thing that stuck out for me was Jack Ross on Premier Sports, I think, called it a strange performance from Hibs. And I thought it's not a bad way of summing it up. Because there were elements where you could see, this is a David Gray Hibs team. But then a lot of the time you were thinking, this isn't the Hibs that we've kind of come to know. So I think, that's something that will have probably have kind of stuck out for Gray, that it was a strange performance. It wasn't sort of the way he wants him to play. It's not the way he's drilled him to play. So, I can imagine it'll be interesting to see what changes he makes for tomorrow night. I don't think he'll be under any, he won't be under any illusions as to how important the game is. It's just how he approaches that, how he seeks to address those issues that have been, kind of problems for longer than they should have been. And, whether that's tactical, whether it's personnel, or something entirely different, I think we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I think you'll get a good idea of, a game coming off, a couple of days after a Saturday game, and it's, as we've talked about, it's so important for Hibs to get a result. And the kind of team he picks probably give you an idea of sort of who he trusts to go and do the job at the moment, whether he makes wholesale changes or whether it's, minimal. I think that'll give you an insight as to where he sees the sort of readiness of certain players. I'm not saying for a minute, if certain players don't start, then you can write them off. That's not what I'm going for. But I think, we have seen that at times that it can take time for guys to be sort of fully given the license to go and do what the manager expects them to do in this team. And it's just, I think, just to round off, I think it's a sort of win at all costs game. This, I think, you could say, I'm maybe contradicting myself because I think earlier on that people are expecting a result and performance, but I think maybe when you look at it in a bit more context, for me, it's maybe just one that you just have to go and win by any means necessary, because I think, see, when you look at the games that are coming up afterwards, you're away at Celtic at the weekend. We know how long it's been since Hibs have won at Celtic Park, and then after that, you're into the Edinburgh derby. So I don't think you don't want to be going into that game with a sort of negative atmosphere around the place because you're struggling to pick up wins. So I think for me, the Falkirk game just becomes, because it comes so quickly off the back of Rangers, it's an away game, a midweek night, the plastic pitch, a good side in Falkirk who will they sort of play a certain way. They will probably look to come out and get after Hibs. It's just one of those. I think get 3 points on the board and move on from it. Just to, as I say, just to get things back on a wee bit more of an even keel. Because I'm not. Again, I hate to. If it would sound as though we're sitting here pressing the panic button, and I don't think we are. But as we've talked about, you kind of know how quickly perceptions and opinion can turn, and just to get a win on the board after a couple of frustrating results would do this team the world of good. And
what I would say, actually, is if you think back to last season, it was a disappointing result in a Saturday evening kickoff that then kind of gave way to a midweek game on a Tuesday night that kind of kickstarted the season. So, far from pressing the panic button, there's a little bit of positivity. Obviously it's not a home game, but if we're going for good omens, then there's one, maybe, possibly.
Absolutely. Well, we'll end it on a positive note then, shall we? Because David Gray he's going to be speaking to the media ahead of tomorrow night's game, and we're going to be heading through to HTC for that this afternoon. So do keep an eye on the website for the latest updates ahead of Tuesday night's game at Falkirk, and of course we'll be there to cover that as well. So thank you very much for joining us this morning, folks. We'll speak to you again very soon. I hope you have a good day. Cheers.